Before we start, just a note, this isn't a review, it's just some loose thoughts and impressions of a game I just finished. Spoiler warning, I'm going to talk about plot points from the end of the game. So this is the first time I ever completed a Final Fantasy game. I've played a couple of the SNES ones before a little, but I don't have the fond memories of this series that you see in most of the Steam reviews of this re-release. So without that nostalgia working in my favour, what did I think of Final Fantasy X? Well, it was actually way better than I expected. I knew that it was going to be a game with a story and lots of combat. I expected, honestly, about 90% of the runtime of it to be just sort of combat and padding, but it actually skewed way more towards the story than I expected. And yeah, it was fairly ridiculous in places, but it was a pretty good yarn with some enjoyable twists. The characters, although not particularly complicated, grew to be very likeable over the course of the game, and the plot held together pretty well. Despite a lot of pieces in the air at any one time, the emotional beats of the story felt well earned. It was genuinely engrossing and poignant. By the end of it, there's a real sense of having gone on a long and grueling journey. I didn't know what to expect from the themes of the story, so when it looked like it was going to be about the superiority of religious orthodoxy over human ingenuity, I got a bit worried, but fortunately that was something the game was just building up just to undermine. I like the idea of a pilgrimage being the thing that propelled the plot forward, and I loved that, despite the line, "This is my story," you don't play the main character, which is Yuna. I mean, the player character, who my wife made me name Reject, and if I live to be 100, I'll never come up with a pun that clever, has plenty of agency, but would things have gone any differently if he wasn't on the pilgrimage? Seymour would have still tried to marry Yuna, the party would have still uncovered the corruption of the church, and they would have still battled Yunalesca and gone on to try and kill Yu Yevon. I mean, maybe your presence tips the scales in battle, but it didn't seem like it was making any big decisions. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I thought it was unusual and interesting that the character you control isn't the most important one. There was a weird moment in the ending, though. The character arc of Reject, Tidus, is that he grows from this petulant kid into a much more mature and philosophical person, and he learns much more about the father he despises, who he was as a person, what he went through, what his thoughts were, and what he sacrificed. So that at the climactic moment of this character arc, he meets his father and says, "I hate you." I mean, the game does show us that his feelings toward his dad have changed, but the "I hate you" scene is played like it's this deeply significant moment of emotional closure. Maybe it was just a bit too subtle. I mean, in retrospect, I guess we're supposed to infer that he really means "I love you," but that didn't really come through in the writing or the performance at the time. I don't know, it was the one note of the ending that didn't especially work for me. I do have a few complaints about the design of the game. Combat animations really slowed things down. The sphere grid that you use to level up characters hides a fairly simple leveling mechanic behind a ridiculously unwieldy and awkward interface. Blitzball absolutely sucks. The one game that you need to play in the course of the game, I somehow drew 1-1 and kept going into overtime. For about 45 minutes I struggled to either win or to lose, which either one of which would have been necessary to progress and to save. That was infuriating. The cutscenes are impressive for their age, but I really did not need to be forced to watch them as many times as I did. I don't care when a game was made. Save points before long, protracted, unskippable cutscenes have always been a terrible way to treat the player, and it's really surprising that they didn't remedy that in the remaster. And despite going through the whole game without using the built-in cheats, except for occasionally toggling off random encounters, after legitimately beating Seymour and Yunalesca and Sin's Head, in the last boss fight my patience finally ran out, and I decided that instead of rage quitting, I'd supercharge my way through. I hadn't done most of the optional content, but since I ended up resorting to cheating anyway, I wish I hadn't wasted time grinding levels in the mid and late game. I should have just cheated earlier. But yeah, I really did enjoy Final Fantasy X, and I could see myself playing more of these games in the future. Probably not for a while because they're pretty demanding on time. I'm not going to play X2 because by the sounds of it, it's not a particularly beloved sequel, and I thought 10 had good closure as it is. The story kept driving me forward, the music was as good as everyone says, and I feel just a little more informed now about an admittedly small part of the huge edifice that is Final Fantasy. So, 7 weeks into the year, and I finally finished the first of 12 games, but I knew this and Dark Souls were always going to be the most time consuming. Theoretically, most of the games on the list should take me less than a month, so we'll put that to the test with the next game, the original Tomb Raider. I'm Chris, and hey, I got through this whole video without mentioning the laughter scene. Thanks for stopping by.